Hello, I'm Mike Schlexer with 91.9 FM KPTZ and the 14th Annual Port Townsend Film Festival. I'm here interviewing Koski, the editor of the film Road to Karakol. Hi Nasa, how are you today?
Good.
Thanks for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the movie for people who have not seen it?
Well, The Road from Karakol follows a character in person, Kyle Dempster, and he is a rock climbing athlete, and he decides that he wants to go to Kyrgyzstan to bike and explore the mountains there. And what he does is he hasn't actually ever bike toured before, but he decides he's going to bring a bike, his backpack, and some climbing gear, and have a trailer, and assemble it in the parking lot in Kyrgyzstan at the airport, and travel around for a little over a month exploring the mountains and whatnot on his bike. But what he discovers is that the roads that he was planning on traveling on have disappeared. They're old Soviet roads and they've been abandoned over the years, and so he really goes on to this adventure of exploration and solo trip from Bishkek, which is the northern part of Kyrgyzstan, trying to get south to China.
So he's riding around Asia. He's finding that these roads, which maybe when they were put on the maps by the Soviets, were probably just dirt roads to begin with, and now they're little more than game trails.
Yeah, a lot of them are very difficult to even tell that they're roads.
Can you talk a little bit more about the processes he had to face with that and the things you saw as an editor? Because you were not there in the field with him. What you saw was the footage coming back and speaking with him after the fact about what happened and what was going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I should say too that so how we got this footage was, I mean, he's a sponsored athlete, and a big sponsor of his is Outdoor Research, and so he came back with all this footage. He basically went Survivor Man style with a point and shoot camera and filmed his whole journey. And so he'd set up the camera and then, go back and then bicycle through or hike through, so you could see him doing it, and he spent a lot of time talking to the camera. And Outdoor Research came to us and wanted a full, basically like a piece that they could share of Kyle's journey. And when we got the footage, I was sort of the first one to take a look at it and realized this has got to be more than like a little piece that they wanted. The story of him and the adversity he sort of had to go through in terms of pushing his bike, not knowing exactly where he was. I mean, he had these old Soviet maps and trying to just figure out with the terrain of the land, how can I get from where I am right now to these mountains to explore those mountains. And so the team that I worked with, Fitz was the main producer and director, and Austin Snydak was the primary editor. So I took a lot of the footage. I cut a trailer. I started sort of piecing together all of the primary story elements, and then Austin and Fitz also came together, and we worked as a team basically to try to cobble this story together. So the story developed, I guess, over about a year's worth of effort trying to get it together.
Not just a travel log as you perhaps expected it to be when you began, just the story of the journey. A lot of very emotional points in his movie, in this documentary, your documentary. When he got caught by sudden downpours or trapped by the rain, the inclement weather, he had a river crossing, he had some difficulty with some checkpoints out in the middle of nowhere, and then would get on the camera, as you said, point it at himself and talk about some of the experience he's having and some of the very emotional things he was going through. Could we talk about, for starters, going through the checkpoint where it just seemed he was riding down the road, there was this checkpoint in the middle of nowhere, and he got hassled by the fuzz.
Yeah, so apparently there's a lot of checkpoints along the way, and there was one particular checkpoint where he knew he needed to cross the river to get to where he was. where he wanted to go to. And so he reached this military checkpoint because he had heard that if you can get through that checkpoint, that's going to be your path across the river. But he was hassled, and so they actually proceeded to try to get him very drunk, and they tried to give them money, which he did, and in the end they sort of became not cooperative, and he ended up being turned away. And so here he was, drunk, and he had been, trying for at least a week, trying to get across this river, and sort of wasn't sure what he was going to do, if he had to bike all the way back from where he was at that point. And so he was riding along, and he just saw this little faint, like, kind of spur. And I think for most people who would be riding around a place like Kyrgyzstan, probably wouldn't think anything of it. But he follows it, and he discovers a way across.
And really, most of these paths are little more than game trails. That's what they looked like to me. Like it had just been goats or something that had been running along there, and he was like, no, this is the road. And gaining that bridge, he then got across the river and continued on his journey, only to find that he had many other river crossings that he had to do. And in one, he actually got on the camera beforehand and really said goodbye to people. Said goodbye to his mom and his dad and his brother, and told everybody he loved them if something happened. So it seemed like he had some pretty serious, genuine fear and terror going on about this river crossing. Did he talk to you about that at all and explain what was going on?
Yeah, I mean, he's a climber, and I think that's his comfortable element. So a lot of people might think, oh, he fears nothing and whatever, but he really has a legit fear of water. And so hauling his bike and all of his gear across these river crossings was a big ordeal, and something that took many shuttles. So he would basically find some secure rocks or things that were on the shore, hook a line and travel across, and then hook it to the other side. And then he would ferry his bike and ferry his trailer and ferry his backpack along. And so it wasn't just one time. He actually had to get into the water each time, multiple times across that same river, and through his journey had to do it several times. So he was pretty fearful at times, just because those undercurrents and the size and the effort that it took to
being so isolated, no one there to help him if he did get into trouble.
Exactly. He's in the middle of nowhere. It's been 6 days since he last saw anyone. And so
the movie began at a river crossing where he was standing naked and was talking about, well, I'm going to cross this river.
Right, that's right.
Was that your choice?
Yeah, I mean, when I watched every single clip that he provided, and I saw that clip, I'm like, the film has to open with this clip. One, you get a sense of him as a character, and he's just out there for an adventure, and he's a naked man standing on the bank in Kyrgyzstan, and he has a sense of humor. So that's really what Kyle is full of life, and I felt like that shot embodied him as a person and a character, and really the sense of adventure that he was on.
Let's talk about the post-production process, where you were involved as the editor. Can you tell us about the process and about maybe some of the things that occurred for this film in that process? I know that editing can be pretty cut and dry and tedious work at times, where you're just watching or listening to the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah.
But can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. When we received the hard drive, the first thing you have to do is just get oriented. And so I basically watched every single clip. And what was really cool about it was that it was like he had filmed so much of his journey and shared so much of what he was thinking and feeling and whatnot. It was almost like just watching the individual clips that I was there with him, and I was living the story. And I was sort of just like seeing the raw footage, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. And oh, that's so funny, and oh, that's so like intense. So that's sort of the first clue of, you know, saying, okay, this has to be a bigger piece. And I showed it to Fitz and I showed it to Austin, and I said, let's try to make something of this. And so, you know, part of editing is sort of like how you're going to fund that, because originally it was just like, oh, just like this quick little project, and we had to kind of go back and try to seek funding to support something that was going to be larger.
And how did you do that?
Well, we first, I mean, it's sort of a process of working with his sponsors and working with people where this story would really resonate, people who cared about what he was doing, and people in the climbing and adventure community, and sort of tapping them and showing them. And so we cut a trailer, we talked to people and tried to share the footage that was there and our vision for it. Yeah.
Can you tell us something about the film we don't know?
Well, pretty much 100% of the footage that was shot by Kyle, and all of it was shot in Kyrgyzstan except for one clip. There was this point, and Austin was actually the primary, he was finishing the film at this point, and there was this sticking point where we couldn't really figure out how to branch one shot from another shot, and we asked Kyle after the fact to get us one shot. And so there's one shot in the film that happened after Kyrgyzstan. And so sometimes stuff like that happens to just try to bring the story fully together. And it's funny, if you go on to some of the bike forums where this film has been shared and talked about, people will notice that there's a slight difference in the bikes. And so that's that one shot.
So the experts caught you.
The experts got us, yeah. Yeah, not that we were trying to hide it, but I thought it was really cool that that people were like, hey, and so they were really paying attention.
They were watching the continuity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about something maybe hit the editing room floor that you would have liked to have in the movie that maybe did that occur? Did
Right.
you have anything that hit the floor that you would have liked in the movie? And if so, what was it?
Well, if you see the festival cut, you'll see a lot of the funny moments at the very, very end in the credits, and so it's worthwhile to go to see it in the fests and the theaters, because you get to see that. We also have an internet cut, but that footage isn't there, so it's just Kyle being goofy and Kyle, like, I don't know, having fun out there. There's also another part that didn't make any of the cuts, and that is that he would go and spend time in these yurts, and while he was there, one of the families actually ripped him off. So he would leave his bike and all of his stuff there, and then he would go and climb in the mountains and then come back. He was very trusting and whatnot, but when he came back, he realized some things had been stolen. And like random things like a book and things like that, and he wasn't sure why those things were stolen. Yeah, and he was sort of like, you know, they obviously needed that, or they were curious about it, and so he didn't think anything of it. But I just thought it was an interesting thing that he was so trusting going into these families, and also they of him, and you know, so that was something that happened that didn't make it.
Nasa Koski,
Mm-hmm.
The Road to Karakol, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Schlexer with KPTZ 91.9 FM Port Townsend and the 14th Annual Port Townsend Film Festival. Thank you so much.